now then, to continue with our work here, I thought that what might be of use at this time, as we are coming toward the end of our series on Hermes, to do a hopefully very brief recollection of the main thoughts that we have shared before and that lead up to maybe today's and next week's conclusion. One of them being that first of all we agreed, at least I agreed, I didn't ask you to agree, I agreed, we agreed on the proposition that in whatever peculiar way it may have come about, in what strange ways it may have been passed on, but there seems to have been pretty much throughout the entire history of the world what might be called an esoteric tradition, which of course was not identical from one age to another, but was always, let's say, of a more profound, more internal and more transformative nature than the exoteric or external, or sometimes it has also been called extroverted spiritual tradition of the world at that particular time. So anyway, this is something that apparently in some fashion was always here. Whether it was managed by shamans in the jungle or in ancient Siberia, or whether it was managed by others, it was always present. So that when people became familiar with the spirituality, with the particular pantheon that was in use in that tradition, they would eventually, particularly if they were so inclined, they would be led to a sort of a sub-theology, which later on maybe came often to be called theosophy from the Neoplatonic model, and that in turn permitted people to enter a deeper and spiritually more helpful manner of dealing with the teachings that they may have received, the stimuli that they may have received for their spiritual growth, for their spiritual transformation. Now, that being the case, we are of course today concerned with possibly with such questions as where does the esoteric tradition of our culture, the one that Mr. Manly Hall so beautifully described already in the title page of his big book. We were just looking at it in the office the other day, and I'm not going to repeat that. But anyway, the Hermetic, Kabbalistic, Gnostic, and let's say maybe there's another one, esoteric philosophy. So that there was something of this sort present for a very long time, which people would rediscover from time to time, and then possibly as new discoveries were made and are made, these discoveries became some of the source books for the study and the practice of such esoteric tradition. In fact, it is, to me, it is downright miraculous how at least twice in the history of our culture. There were discovered writings which nobody even knew that they existed, at least in that form. And that these writings in turn became a new impetus and a new way of approaching this deeper tradition. And these were, of course, the Corpus Hermeticum, as it is called in Latin, and the Nag Hammadi library, which is, well, Arabic and English. Nag Hammadi is an Arabic word and English. But in both cases, writings of which no one had any notion. Now, maybe I shouldn't overstate it too much, because there are some writings, for instance, in the Nag Hammadi library, of which fragments have been available, or which the fame of which was available, one of them being the Gospel of Thomas. But on the whole, these were all brand new material for the study of scholars, and also, I think, for the inspiration of all sorts of people that became available in our history. One right at the beginning of the Renaissance, in the Quinquecento, as the Italians call it, the 1500s. That is the Hermetic, the Corpus Hermeticum, the Hermetic writings, and then, of course, in our own time, in the immediate aftermath of World War II, the Nag Hammadi library. Now, that's a good general, I think, a good general view. And I think that if you have a little bit of an inclination toward the mystery, you have a little bit of an occult Sherlock Holmes hidden inside of you, with or without his pipe. I understand he smoked a real good tobacco, as did Mr. Manly Hall too. You know, that then you would be probably interested in it, even though that discovery was made long, long ago, 16th century, yet it has been subject to exegesis, it has been subject to explanations, translations, retranslations, commentaries, all throughout that period of time. And of course there is now a library in various languages, translations available, for instance, of the Nag Hammadi library, which I would say that it would fill up about 3/4 of the cabinet space in this room, because people are translating, people are interested, people are publishing, and that's a very, very good thing. Now, with that little jump ahead, we need to keep in mind that up till this time, and I think I already mentioned that up to this time, really the only such collection of esoteric books from the early period of our history that was available was that of the Hermetic writings, mostly written in Greek. And once again, the discovery of these and the enthusiasm that their readers experienced was such that it looked, but unfortunately that process was not completed, it looked indeed as if the Hermetic books then discovered might become of much greater ongoing influence on the totality of Western culture than they actually had. Because when they were discovered in Greece and in the Balkans. And then they were brought over to what was still really the center of Western Christian culture, to Rome. And there they fell into the hands of the illustrious Medici family, and it is said that Lorenzo il Magnifico, the great Renaissance prince of the House of Medici, when he saw them, he told his translator, whose name unfortunately my geriatric mind won't recall, because he's also very famous, he told him, put everything away and translate these. And the man was astonished, and he said, oh, Your Highness, but what I'm translating is Plato. He says, I instruct you, you can put Plato aside and do this. So you can see that enthusiasm was coming and was winning. So let us say as far as the content of these two libraries is concerned, when we strip them of their external nomenclatures and sometimes of the language in which they were written, because the majority of the Nag Hammadi library was written in Coptic, which is the language of the Egyptians when they changed from the hieroglyphics to an alphabetic writing. And you know that the Coptic language and the hieroglyphics, for instance, were not translated. They couldn't translate them until Napoleon came and took his French troops over to Egypt. And while there, one of his scholars whom he brought with him, François Champollion, discovered a document in stone, which came to be called the Rosetta Stone. And in the Rosetta Stone you have in parallel columns a particular text. The text is not that important, the content, but in parallel columns you have the same message in hieroglyphics, in Coptic, and in Greek. I don't think Latin got in on it. But certainly the greatest help in discovering especially the hieroglyphics and the Coptic language, which up to that time pretty much no one had the ability to translate, at least no one from our culture. So you may say some bad things about old Napoleon, but let's put it this way, there is almost nothing. I would testify to that as a long-time student of history, because that was my first love before I became fascinated by religion, especially esoteric religion. But the issue being that a way in which they could now decipher the hieroglyphics particularly was a momentous discovery. Absolutely. Because up to that time, the scholars still came, sure, and all kinds of people to Egypt, and of course the Vandals, not the Vandals of a Germanic tribe, but the Vandals of Arabic time, who then came after the 5th century, took over Egypt. But all these people, all these disasters that befell Egypt after that time were made tolerable because now people could decipher, if they so pleased, the ancient hieroglyphics of Egypt and also the later writing of the people who followed the ancient Egyptians, the Copts. So these were very, very important. Now once that was discovered, then the way was open to the deciphering, the translation of some very interesting material. But you know what? Still, I would say almost 1,000 years went by before, from the Byzantine Empire, the Corpus Hermeticum, the great Hermetic library, was surreptitiously brought over first to the Balkans and then to Italy, and then when the Medici got hold of it. So although the ways of reading it and deciphering was available, it still took a very long time. And so all of a sudden the scriptures were there, and they caused, as I mentioned, a tremendous excitement, not only by the Medici princes, but by many others. There was a Roman Catholic, well, there are no others, cardinal, an Italian cardinal by the name of Patrici, who was very, very important at the Vatican. Cardinal Patrici openly asked his fellow cardinals and the popes and made propaganda that the Corpus Hermeticum should be included in the canon of the Church, which means it would have had equal status in the Roman Catholic religion, maybe in the Orthodox too, with the Bible. But he said this was so important, it was such profound religious character, but unfortunately it did not receive that distinction yet at that time, but it has had several translations and really created a Hermetic tradition, also sometimes referred to as Hermeticism. Incidentally, I'll just throw it in again very briefly because we discussed this before. How should we put it? The uniqueness and at the same time the tremendous usefulness of the Hermetic writings was revealed to those who managed to read it, and they discovered that they are in the hands now of a newer generation and still probably of very great importance. Now, obviously, the Hermetic writings, the Corpus Hermeticum, corpus, by the way, means a body, a corpse. So when you say, I don't know, the corpus of Goethe's works in the library, then you have all of Johann Wolfgang von Goethe's books together, and this is the entire corpus, the whole body of writings. And so this was regarded as a very, very interesting and very important work. Now then, as we already used his name several times up to this point, the writings are poetically and religiously, which was very much the custom in the ancient world, attributed to a supernatural figure. And that supernatural figure is Hermes. So it is assumed either that Hermes himself is talking and somebody is there writing it down, or on the other hand that the very words come from Hermes, and then there are scribes there writing it down. Now, we said a few things at the beginning of our series about Hermes, and I will very, very quickly summarize them. Hermes is a god of the ancient polytheistic Greek pantheon, to whom were attributed in ancient Greece little kind of peculiar and not aesthetically terribly pleasing, not very tall, maybe about this tall, shorter than a man, pyramid-shaped stones. And such a pyramid made out of stones is called in ancient Greek a herm. And so Hermes is the god with the stones, with the pyramid-shaped stone, which has nothing to do with modern attributions of a pharmaceutical nature to the word stone or being stoned. But let us say he is regarded as a legitimate member of the ancient pantheon, and he is of course has his story, but because everything with the Greeks has a story, and the story was that he incurred the wrath of a lot of the gods because he killed, let's say, he killed Atlas, who is a very important god because he holds the world on his shoulder, of course, the gods and the goddesses were always jealous of each other, and now and then they killed each other, and then Zeus, or later on Jupiter, had to come and revive them. So in any way, Hermes' story is described in the work Ion by Euripides, and the god Atlas then was brought back to life. But as a punishment to Hermes, the gods decreed that whenever he appeared somewhere, people had to erect a little handmade monument to him out of stones shaped pyramidal. I mentioned last time with my conjectural sense, I felt that there is a meaning in the little stone Hermetic pyramids of Hermes and in the great pyramids of Egypt. Now, what that meaning is, I think I have given a suggestion, and maybe I won't repeat it again because it takes let's say I have a feeling that it is on the shape of pyramid, whichever way it is constructed, is a model, is a cosmic model. By cosmic here I mean not just the physical cosmos like sun, moon and stars, but an esoteric cosmical model. And if that is too esoteric, then ask me about it in person and I'll tell you afterwards. In any event, I think that even the little pyramids on the corners of streets in Greece had an esoteric meaning. Now then, the very first text that came to be translated of the Corpus Hermeticum tells of the creation of humanity as put forth in the Hermetic form, where the original man, and I think I mentioned that last time, they were sort of a Greek Adam, looks down a cosmic precipice or some kind of a shaft from where he finds himself, and he falls in love with the light of the world below, of the lower cosmos, and he falls or jumps into the abyss and is now caught in this world. So that is the creation of humanity in ancient Hermetic form. Number one, that it was a mistake. This shall by. The way humanity has behaved all these thousands of years, the way humanity behaves today, I would say that it has developed by mistake. Now, don't take that too seriously, but I actually mean it somewhat seriously. Because the humans are not only the funniest monkeys, but they are also the most changeable, the most capricious, the most treacherous, and when it comes right down to it, the most murderous of all species on Earth. At least that's what it looks like to me. If you disagree, tell me. Maybe I'll change my mind. In any event, that's how humans came here, by mistake. And I can agree with that. I think mine was a mistake too, because as I never cease repeating and work into most of my lectures, I swear to this day that almost immediately after my birth as a tiny infant, I was convinced that I have come to the wrong place, and I was thoroughly chagrined to be here. It took me several years to come to terms with living in this world. But then, since I had very fine parents, very accepting parents, and I lived, which at that time was a very nice and very comfortable country, well, it just took a few years to get over that disappointment, and now I'm feeling it again. You know, maybe if I had been born, I don't know, on Mars or Venus or so, then things would be better. None of this to be taken too seriously. In any event, the Corpus Hermeticum became beginning at the time of the Renaissance, beginning in the 1500s, 1600s, around there, became an extremely popular work for scholarship, and maybe a little more subdued for spirituality. As I mentioned, some people in the church even wanted to include it in the church canon, which would have made it equal to the biblical books. But in any event, it was known to the scholarly world, to the ecclesiastical world, and as such, it is axiomatic that much of the content and the overall philosophical and mystical tone of the Corpus Hermeticum became common knowledge. Now you wonder about that, how can that be? Here at an somewhat earlier time, few centuries earlier, maybe 1,000 years earlier, just a few centuries too, the Gnostic writings were condemned by the church. And whenever the ecclesiastical authorities found them, they would destroy them. And the Hermetics were not. So what's the reason for that? because the Hermetic writings are not Christian. They don't pretend to be Christian. They never mention Jesus Christ. They never refer either to the Old or the New Testament. They're a completely separate set of scriptures, which at least ostensibly goes back to a mysterious pagan god. And so they were okay. So all throughout history, if you quoted from the Hermetic writings, you were all right. If you quoted from the Gnostic writings, then better watch out, because you might find a hot departure from this world occasioned by the Inquisition. So that's a big difference. But this was, well, I don't know now really how to put it. I think this was, in terms of availability, this was to the advantage of the Hermetic writings, because people kept referring to the Hermetic writings and made parallels of that with sacred scripture and so forth, just because it did not, as they would say, pretend to be Christian. But with the Gnostics it was a little bit difficult, because there you find an alternative version really of Christianity, maybe not entirely, an alternative Jesus, who is still there and his name is used in everything, but it's a different Jesus from the one generally known, and things of that sort. So there was always a difference. And so somehow, right up to the time of, not only the time of the Renaissance, but even later, the Church would not condemn the Hermetic writings, because it said, well, it's a pagan philosophical writing, just like Cicero was writing, or the Greek philosophers and Plato and others. You know, this does not interfere with the Christian faith. And this was the salvation, therefore, of the Hermetic writings. Now, all right, however, not everyone had such a mellow attitude toward the Hermetic writings as did the Roman Catholic Church, or the Greek Church for that matter, because something happened which happens periodically in history and always causes a great commotion. And what is that? The coming of Islam, which is not something that is unknown to you from recent history. And what was that? Well, the Arabs, who came out of originally from the Hejaz, from the Arabian desert, and became powerful. They assumed the new faith of the Prophet Muhammad, and now they became convinced that it would be very beneficial to them if they conquered the world. Just like that, conquer the world. Why? Because they were the only ones who had the ultimate, the true religion, preached by the seal of the prophets, by the last prophet, and therefore it is every Muslim's duty to convert everybody to Islam, and then everybody will be saved, and I don't know, they may even, there was a sort of a strange jokey thing made a while ago that you will go to the Muslim heaven where you meet the 70 virgins, but somebody said that's a mistake. What you will meet is a 70-year-old virgin. So I always felt that that was a true revelation, that particular statement. Or maybe it's 75. Let's up it a little after all. Now, in any event, so the Arabs came to Egypt. And for one thing, they obviously were very opposed to sacred imagery, because anyway, there are various Islamic statements that you should not depict the human form either in sculpture or in painting. And the reason for that being that the human form has a relationship to God's form. It took me months to look that up once in the Hadith. So if you depict the human, then you are actually blaspheming God by giving God a human shape. That's the original thought. But as all theology, it goes on and on and on, until finally you don't know what this is all about. And they seriously doubted that the Ayatollahs and the mullahs know what it is about, but it is there. So in any event, they moved into Egypt, and wherever they saw the beautiful Egyptian statues, they came and hacked off their noses, their faces. And they are still that way. And in addition to that, when the Caliph rode into Alexandria, I think I mentioned it last week, some of his captains came to me and said, Highness, there is a fabulous library here in Alexandria. It's been there for a long time. It's been there since Alexander the Great and his generals, the Ptolemies. And it's really very valuable and very interesting things there. The Caliph said, we need only one book, the Quran. Go and burn it up. So they burned the Alexandrian library. Although you got to keep in mind that as time went on, from the time of Alexander, there were several incarnations, so to say, of the Alexandrian library. People came and brought books again, and I suppose there is one now. But in any event, Egypt fell on bad days. I read the prophecy last time about that. It's not necessary to read it again. So now the Corpus Hermeticum, therefore, was maybe a few copies still in Egypt, but it was available primarily where? In Europe, because it has become so famous, so highly regarded, that now there were numerous copies and the translations from the Greek into the Latin and so forth. So the Corpus Hermeticum was not lost. Something else happened, which again this did not come to the light until comparatively recently. I think 20th century at the most, maybe late 19th century. And what is that? That the Arabs, they came in, they were not all such religious fanatics as their caliph was, and they liked books. And so they didn't burn all the Alexandrian library too. But one of the things that they found strange books about something that they didn't know what to call it, a kind of a science which had to do with transformation, and which they called the black thing, because Chem in the Arabic of that time means black, and Al is just like THE. So they found something and they named it the black thing from Egypt. And the black books from Egypt, there were several, but there was one that was easier to deal with than others, was first translated into Arabic. And I have a copy of it somewhere, I mean a modern copy of it, but I don't have the youthful memory to recall its name at the moment, but it is around. And this was the beginning of a long, long career of particularly the Mediterranean area and Europe in Arabia. Now, interestingly enough, the first people into whose hands it fell were the Arabs, but then it got out, and before you know it, there was a growing interest in what was often called the great art, or the new science, or alchemy, the science from the dark land. And why is Egypt the dark land? I think I mentioned that here before. Not because it's bad or something like that, it's the dark land because once a year the river Nile inundates, still does it, and it covers large territories with black mud. And this black mud in turn creates a very wonderful soil for growing things. And in the olden days, the Romans got all their wheat from Egypt, and later on various other things, and more recently when the British became influential, they grew cotton in the black land. Cotton is not only grown in the American South, it's grown in many other places. In any event, it came from the black land. That was the code name, so to say, for Egypt. Now what we need to refer to now, and I really only have this evening and next week, so in very broad outline form to share with you the essence of Hermeticism, which is related to alchemy and which is the spiritual philosophy of the dark land. So what we have here is also, it is really much more closely related to Gnosticism than anybody admitted it, but it has to do with a Weltanschauung, as we call it in German, a worldview, which describes that the universe, the world was not created in 5 days or 7 days with the Garden of Paradise, but that the cosmos evolved, although I don't like that term, emanated out of a great divine plenum, very much like what the Gnostics call pleroma, and that therefore the physical world and the physical bodies, human and animal on it, have within them, first of all, an illustrious past of having come from a divine source. Secondly, a promising future wherein they may recover consciousness of that source. And in addition to that, various modalities by which they can transform their present nature in such a way that it will become wiser, holier, more adroit, more discerning of the true duties and the true nature of the human soul. So we have within us, because of our origins, we have within us a certain potential, which certainly, well, ancient Egypt might have recognized, at least in some of its temples, that fact. But on the whole, it is not a notion that occurs very frequently in religion. Why? Because, well, at least one reason being that I think that it is to the advantage of the leaders of the various religions to keep their congregation down. In other words, we are the servants of God, we are the interpreters of the Holy Picture and the Holy Picture of the Holy Scripture, and you guys don't know anything. So you come and do what we tell you to do, and then everything will be right and God is going to like us. And I think that if you translate that into various modalities of sophistication, then you will find that this, what do they call it nowadays? It's not a legend, but a narrative, that's the real modern word. So this is the narrative of the religions later on. We, the mullahs, the priests, the whatever, and there's also whatever in some churches. So we know what's good for you. We tell you how to behave. We know you how to eat. We know you how to have sex or not have it more often, and things of that sort. And you listen to us and everything will be all right. But somehow the notion that you have within yourself the potential to discover and to develop into a being much wiser, much better, much kinder, much holier than humans usually are. In other words, you humans can undergo what, unfortunately, Madame Blavatsky, whom I greatly revere, and some of her disciples used the word evolution, because they lived in the time of Darwin, and that was a buzzword, as we call it nowadays. So I don't think evolution is a good word for it, but you are capable of a transformation. Now, there is a great difference. There's a great difference between transformation and evolution, because in transformation, the transformed entity changes into something very, very different from the originally transforming entity. I usually like to brag about how I was around in northern Hungary when we actually remember, our family did not, but another landowning family, they were cultivating silkworms. But the government would pay you quite a bit of money if you sent the silkworms in, and then they would make silk out. So in order to have the silkworm doing what it's supposed to do, they would send eggs, silkworm eggs. And you put the eggs on mostly mulberry trees, but no, don't try to do it because I may be telling it to you wrong. But in any event, and then the little worm creates a cocoon and spins itself into that cocoon. First it eats a lot of tree leaves, and then sits there and changes, while it is in the cocoon at a certain point, it changes into a being that it does not resemble it at all. It transforms. It changes into a being rather like a butterfly, with wings, actually quite an aesthetically pleasing little pot. And before that it was an ugly little worm-like thing. Now, all right, the Hermeticists said this is possible for the human. But then comes the next question. How are we going to show people, how are we going to teach people that they can do this? How are they going to do it? And that is when they discovered the alchemical books. Aha. And I think that very soon there were people who did not interpret alchemy as a purely chemical, physical activity, but an elaborate symbolic set for transformation, which can be applied just as well or better to the total physiological and psychological nature of the human as it can be applied to anything else. And so now we had the era of a lot of alchemists, or a lot of people resorting to alchemy, and various reasons for it being that, of course, the extroverted human mind will interpret what it can in a physical fashion. And so they interpreted alchemy as purely physical. And they studied the various stages of transformation. And at the end of the transformation, there comes some really great miraculous transformation, sometimes expressed as the philosopher's stone, which has miraculous qualities. It can heal the sick, it can bring to life the dead, and it assuredly can change ignoble metals like iron or lead or the main thing into gold. Now, needless to say, there were more people interested in changing stuff into gold than they were interested in anything else. But in certain ways, this redounded to the benefit of the alchemists. Because the alchemists were sort of like more prominent and more elegant gypsies. They would come around to the mansions, to the castles, and to the monasteries and say, look, if you help us install an alchemical laboratory here, and you pay us so much money, we will make something for you that in turn will make gold. We can't promise you how soon, but we can. And of course everybody wanted gold. This was mostly before the discovery of America, where gold was literally in the streets of the Incas and maybe the Aztecs too, and the Toltecs and the Zapotecs and whatever the rest of the boys were. But gold was not easy to come by. And so the alchemists had a ready-made clientele. Sometimes they delivered some gold even, sometimes not. Sometimes they milked the patron as long as they could, and then they packed up and said goodbye. But in any event, they were all over the place. And a small alchemist, on the other hand, either was instructed or was instructed in their own consciousness to discover that there is a different meaning of alchemy. And that is the one that Jung began exploring when he started writing his books on alchemy. The first one having been Psychology and Alchemy. And then he wrote 5 books, I think that including that. 5 books on alchemy. I remember I was in Innsbruck at university, philosophy class and psychology class. We were asking the professor, Dr. Jung is supposed to be a psychologist. Why in the heck is he writing so many books about alchemy? He said, well, my boy, you have to read it and study it a little more, because you will see that there is a symbolic meaning. A symbol I understood, okay, I found out. Took to me another 20 years to find out, but to some extent, that that alchemy can be used as a symbolic image of the process of human transformation. And the human transformation being primarily psychological, having little to do with gold, unless we regard gold as a metaphor for human consciousness, but let us say of very great psychophysical use to a human being. So that while few people read Hermeticism in the Middle Ages, except at the time of the Renaissances, and if you want to know why the corpus hermeticum went into disuse, never went away, but into disuse. It was how I was switching to my inquisitorial self. It was the fault of the damn Protestants. That's what it was. Well, it's good to go off steam. But it's not really impossible, because what happened was that the Germans, primarily Germans, and some other European countries, after the Reformation, Protestants. And after all, Luther himself went down to Italy in order to be scandalized by the papal court. And so they came to the conclusion that the spiritual change which the alchemists were talking about, the equally great or even greater spiritual changes that the corpus hermeticum describes, all that divine magic, shall we say, that this was really a pagan kind of a custom. See, they caught on to it, but the Roman Catholic Church didn't care. As long as they didn't pretend to be Christian, okay, go ahead. And so therefore, now when the Protestantism arose, it pushed the frontiers, shall we say, of Hermeticism back, and they never quite could do away with alchemy. Even in the 18th century, I have been shown a Masonic, Freemasonic journal of my native country with of the 18th century, on the Empress Maria Theresa. And that is when we happily, with great rejoicing, chased the Turks out of Hungary. And so they were building new buildings and all that. And the Hungarians were particularly building military installations so that they could fight the Turks back if they came back. And so in all these military barracks, you might call it, but it's such a ruly name. In any event, in all these barracks I saw there was a Masonic lodge, military lodge active, and the military lodge in turn built a separate building attached to the barracks, which was an alchemical laboratory. So by then there occurred the liaison between the between Freemasonry, which had come up sometime earlier, and alchemy, which really continued for quite a while. There were still people in Budapest, some of them very well-connected people from good, rich families and everything, who were practicing alchemy, physical alchemy. And some of them seemed to even understand that there was more to it than the physical. In any event, these were the things that were in part left behind or left to the side by the medieval and Renaissance period involvement in the Hermetic heritage and in Hermetic alchemy. So even though the world changed a great deal, America was discovered and many, many other things, and of course the alchemists did not go underground. There were ceremonial magicians about who learned their magic also from the Hermetic tradition, because it is full of magic, but of a very deific quality. And so these remnants of the original great enthusiasm for Hermeticism and for the Hermetic were there, and they came to the fore after the Reformation, and for a while in some countries, one of them being of all people, what now is called Czechia, the Czech country, Prague and all that sort of thing, the Czech and Moravian country there. For a while they just about installed an esoteric kingdom, which started out with a Catholic emperor, Rudolf II, who was a great alchemist, and his alchemical laboratory, or what left of it, is still shown in Prague, and for a while it looked as if Prague and the Czech country would become a sort of an esoteric country. But of course there were other countries around who were Catholic and who had Inquisition and things like that, and they did away with that. Some of the details I mentioned to you, but there was an upsurge, first in a political fashion, right to the point that they had first an alchemist emperor, and then, by the way, some fool in my life had once said that I was a reincarnation of Rudolf II. Here are actually more essential. I am still a local subject of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, because that's whom my ancestors served in all capacities, but I am not a reincarnation of one of those rulers. I really shouldn't have brought it up, but it seemed like a funny thing to say at the time. But in any event, so various developments popped up, and we'll devote next week to them, wherein in various ways, in various forms, the esoterical was coming back. And just through that much, it was the belief, so to say, of Madame Blavatsky, whom we greatly admire here, that the American Republic was founded under the inspiration of just 3 or 4 European esotericists, Rosicrucians and Freemasons, and one of her disciples, Mr. A.P. Warrington, whom I never had the privilege of meeting any longer, although I met his widow, who was a darling lady. She was a librarian at Crotona Ojai, but they actually discovered some letters of that time where, let's say, that possibility of an esoteric, European esotericists who did not reveal their names, but who did mention some Rosicrucian symbols and all that, coming to America and stimulating the American independence. It's very, very interesting. Tell you the exoteric tradition tells me to shut up. In any event, so there was definitely a crossover, a multiple crossover from Europe to America, and we shall take a look at that and in what manner the Hermetic tradition developed and continued and put on various new appearances when, after the Reformation, when the modes of suppressing it practiced by the Catholic Church were no longer so prominent, and then we will perhaps be able to draw some conclusions as to where and how we might encounter the remnants of that esoteric tradition today. But meanwhile, I came by synchronicity, which is the way us Jungians find things. I came upon a poem. It's really very important. By H.P. Blavatsky, who was not noted really very much for writing poetry, except perhaps to some extent a voice of the silence. And when reading it, I came across it, I had it before, but I lost it. So this is such a hermetic poem that I think it would allow us to conclude in the spirit of Hermeticism and of all the various discoveries and wonderful things that flowed from Hermeticism throughout history, and how in our own way, even today, we can pursue that path, and that indeed the great esotericist of the 19th century, Madame Blavatsky, was aware of that. It's a poem called There is a Road. Some of you have heard it before. There is a road steep and thorny, beset with perils of every kind, but yet a road, and it leads to the very heart of the universe. I can tell you how to find those who will show you the secret gateway that opens inward only and closes fast behind the neophyte forevermore. There is no danger that dauntless courage cannot conquer. There is no trial that spotless purity cannot pass through. There is no difficulty that strong intellect cannot surmount. For those who win onwards, must be a very Victorian expression, to win onwards, to go on. For those who win onwards, there is reward past our all telling, the power to bless and save humanity. For those who fail, there are other lives in which success may come. Helena Petrovna Blavatsky. I thought that this later Hermeticist, and she had an uncle who was very much involved in Hermetic literature, a later Hermeticist who picked up the torch of the esoteric tradition and brought it forward, so as far as we are able to keep it alive, it is still burning This, I think, is an important and a beautiful and an inspiring thought, and I hope it will inspire us to come to Hermes. Thank you very much.